Probably everyone knows what you've done, but you've had like a really awesome career investing in a ton of interesting companies. So I think it'd be cool to maybe do super fast lightning overview of that, and then talk a little bit about how your blockchain journey.
Sure, yeah, and I think to that 100 million question, I don't remember the specific conversation, but I'm guessing, knowing myself, that what I was getting at was this concept that I've been a little bit, maybe it's changed since then, but I don't want to say concerned, but just thinking about the question of kind of the startup world moving more and more to this kind of model of like minimum viable product, take $1 million, do something, raise more money, and this kind of methodology, and then you have the giant companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, spending billions of dollars, and I think what I was kind of getting at a little bit is I worry sometimes that there's this gap where what about I just tend to believe that it's Bill Joy has this great quote that no matter how many smart people you have at your company, the smartest people don't work there, and I just sort of assume like smart ideas are kind of uniformly distributed around the world. And probably, I'm sure there are many brilliant people at Facebook and Google and things, but I think probably many more who aren't there, right? And if all those people are restricted to this one kind of financing model where you've got to like build an app and then get users and then raise more money, like what ideas in the world are there that aren't being built, right? So it's not just about the money per se, it's more this just like, is there a gap in the model of how venture works? And so going to some of the stuff, I've been at Andreessen Horowitz for about 5 years and have done investments sort of, some that have worked and some that haven't in trying to, in some ways trying to fill that gap. So for example, have invested in a number of, kind of more capital intensive hardware projects, a bunch of other kind of things like that. I don't know, anyway, so, and I know we're gonna talk about crypto today. I think back then that was probably the pre-ICO conversation. We're now running an experiment for better or worse, where a whole bunch of people have found new ways to raise money through through so-called ICOs and things like that. And there's a whole bunch of well-funded projects, and we'll see how that plays out. But I do think I don't know. I sometimes worry that. Well, let me talk then. It leads to decentralization because I am a little bit I'm a little bit concerned that in the tech world right now, there's so much power concentrated in 4 or 5 companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, et cetera. I'll say I do think those companies do amazing, wonderful things. The fact that, an interesting fact of science fiction is, as far as I know, there's no science fiction book that predicted, that someday you would pull out a supercomputer from your pocket and type any word in the world and like have millions of pages of all of human information, knowledge, like kind of. I mean, it's a miracle what happened. It's almost like would be almost preposterous, to have imagined it that 30 years ago. And why did they put all the information there? Oh, because it's a crowdsourced group of people that got together and built an encyclopedia. Like it's kind of a miracle like that. Wikipedia is a miracle, in my opinion. The web is a miracle. Google is a wonderful service that provides incredible value to the world and probably much more than they take, I think. So just let me caveat it by saying I think a lot of the things these companies have done is really great. On the other hand, they're kind of, I think they're harvesting the seeds that were planted 30, 20, 10 years ago. And those seeds were, the work of government and academics and volunteers who built the web and built it using decentralized protocols, which I would argue was not an inevitability. There was an alternative version of history that could have happened where a company like AOL or something controlled that, and they didn't. And that was a wonderful thing. I think it was a great thing for small businesses and creators and entrepreneurs and individuals, and it allowed a kid in a dorm room or in a garage to build a search engine and build a Facebook, a social network, and like all those other things, right? And they knew that if you built these things, if you built a search engine and more people came to it, that like the web, the W3C or the IETF or whatever, the decentralized standards weren't going to change and say, I'm going to change the rules on you later on, right? And that allowed that flourishing of entrepreneurship, and the whole chain that goes with it, the entrepreneurs, the investors, the kind of whole thing, the employees, like they all knew that if you did this, it was sort of you're playing on this kind of level playing field that would be static, that wouldn't change, the rules wouldn't change, right? And that's why you had such an explosion of innovation in the 90s and the early 2000s, And that's why you have these great companies that were built. I think a lot of people here are entrepreneurs. You know that building a company today and trying, the key thing people talk about getting distribution, right? You get distribution through a social network. You try to go get distribution through Facebook and Google, et cetera. It's a very dangerous game, right? Yelp is up testifying in front of the Senate about, having their search engine results, lowered down on the list. That's, platform risk is the venture capital vernacular for that risk, right? You build on top of a platform, the platform changes the rules. And so, so how do you do that? Like, how do you get distribution today? How do you build a big company when so much of, for example, on the web, I guess talk more generally, but I'm speaking about the web here, the internet, so much of the distribution things is controlled by these, really basically a kind of like, in the case of distribution, Apple, if they feature you on the App Store. I mean, there hasn't been a new app. I don't think any of the top 30 apps were created since, I think, maybe 2012 was the last time. I mean, so like that is that healthy, right? I mean, like, are we still allowing seeds to get planted and to be built? And is that good for, innovation and entrepreneurship? I mean, don't tell me there haven't been good apps built, there are great apps built since then, right? We've set up all these mechanisms where it's kind of this rich get richer effect, and where, and like maybe the good outcome is you get acquired by one of these companies or something and then subsumed into the Borg or whatever. And so, anyway, so, when you talk about decentralization like that, to me, having platforms where the rules of the platform are fixed and creative people by the way, I'm not just talking about Silicon Valley startups here. Like, think about media companies, right? So you're a media company, and in 2008, you were being, all the social networks were dying to have you on their platform because it would make the platform more exciting, right? Fast forward to today, they're deciding, you'll get this little sidebar over here. Maybe we'll even get rid of that or whatever. Like, the dynamic changes dramatically, right? And I have a blog post about it if you're interested called "Why Decentralization Matters," where I argue that there's sort of this typical kind of S-curve growth, of any platform. Every sort of new technology kind of goes in an S-curve, right? Like, it starts off and then it shoots up, and then at some point it kind of plateaus. And what happens is, if you kind of look, and I'm not blaming any individuals here. This is just the kind of core logic of capitalist centralized platforms, is that at the beginning the incentive is to attract what economists call complements, right? Complementary, like the media companies and Zynga and the games and all this stuff, right? But then over time, at some point, like, hey, our growth's kind of tapering. There's a certain amount of money flowing through the system, and then the incentive becomes, let me take more of that money, right? And we saw this. I mean, this goes back to Microsoft in the old days, and in the modern era, kind of Facebook and Google and all these other companies. And it's just the logic of, like Google's, how do you keep, the core logic of the corporate financial mission of Google today is how do you keep whatever it is, 20+% growth rate going year over year, and it's not going to come through web growth right now, and it's not going to come through other things. So it's going to kind of come through like more and more links and the thing, pushing Yelp down, et cetera, and that dynamic, right? So I think a lot about, like, are we kind of living on borrowed time? Are we, are we harvesting the seeds that were planted, and do we need to plant more seeds now? And so to me, it's very, I think there's a natural, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I'm not the only one who feels that way, and more people are feeling that way, and there's sort of this is part of what's kind of fueling this kind of a lot of the kind of the excitement around blockchains and things like this, is this general feeling of like, there's got to be another way to do this. There's got to be a new set of platforms. And I think it's why the kind of pendulum is shifting, and there's sort of this sense of excitement. It feels like the frontier a little bit. It feels like I get these. I meet a lot of people who are, they're at, it's like typical story. I grew up interested in computers. I read a bunch of, books about Steve Jobs and so and all this other stuff. And I moved out to Silicon Valley, and I got a job at Facebook, and and not kind of denigrate Facebook, it's a wonderful company, but what do you do at Facebook? I'm guessing unless you're a few of the people on like core product teams, you're working on back-end systems, DevOps, whatever, marketing, ad analytics, essentially, and I get this a lot where and then I found myself 5 years into it, and it was fascinating. I had all these smart colleagues, but I was like, do I really want to spend the rest of my career trying to get a whatever 0.2 increase in conversion rate on ads? And meanwhile, I was like hacking on Solidity on the weekends, and I'm like, this is kind of cool. This is the frontier. This is the Wild West. This is what I moved out to Silicon Valley to do, something new and exciting. And yeah, look, it's there's all sorts of, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. There's also, this stuff's early. It's messy. If you're used to like a good set of developer tools and everything else, like this, it's very raw, and there's a lot of work to do. And there's kind of like all these things. There's two ways to look at it. On the one hand, you can look at it like, wow, this is a mess, and like there's not, the developer tools aren't that great, and there's not many products that have product market fit, and and this and that. The other lens to look at it is, wow, I can make a whole career out of this because there's a lot of work to do, and this is going to be really cool, and so why decentralization matters, I think, was the topic. I think it matters. I think that I think to me it's obvious that the internet is the most important invention. I think it's going to be the most important invention, the most important technology of the century. It's going to, now there are 4 billion smartphones, will be probably 8 billion smartphones. Every human hopefully will have a smartphone. There will be, probably 10 to 100x as many internet-connected devices in addition to that, cars, drones, et cetera. This fabric that connects them, we now see it's influencing elections. It's shaping industries. It's determining how money flows throughout society. What are the mechanisms that govern how that works? How building on that system works? How allocating capital? How allocating the money? How how the information is sent around? Those, to me, those seem like very, I don't know, at least to the extent of I have some expertise on something, like they seem like very important societal, political, economic questions. And we kind of backed into this current, I mean, at least I feel like we did. Like, I don't know, I was part of this, I was in it, and we were all like, oh, this is awesome, it's going to be all these, I kind of think like 2007 was kind of a critical moment. There was still like, 2007, like, who was around doing this stuff then, but like, it was like RSS, and you had all these like open protocols that might, like friend of a friend and OPML, I don't know, it's old school stuff, but you had a moment where, yeah, Aaron. So you had a moment where there was a shot at having kind of like a social network, as an example, being open, right? Like RSS in a way was sort of an open competitor to Twitter or Tumblr or something, right? You had a moment where that could have happened, and then but the user experience just wasn't there. It was like you had to go set up your own domain and put up an XML file. It was like this crazy stuff. And then meanwhile, Twitter was just like you sign on and boom, you're good to go, and you got your friends list. In fact, there was a Wired article in 2007 I cited in a blog post where they literally, the Wired article said, we tried to create an open version of Facebook, but we couldn't, and the big issue was they had nowhere to store the list of friends, right? And they had no database, because there was no notion of a common of a community-owned database in 2007. There is today. It's a blockchain, right? I mean, that's what a blockchain is a community-owned database, right? And so there was that moment, and then smartphones came, and the whole thing got accelerated, and boom, and like it's just like the closed side just took off, and the open side is now. I'm talking. It's like archaeology or something, talking about these old protocols, right? But there was a moment where that could have happened, and maybe you can't put that genie back in the bottle. Like maybe those battles are over, but there will be new battles. Like there will be, a question. I think important questions in the next 10 years is who controls, where AI. Like AI. The AI, as you probably know, like there's the algorithms. Those are mostly open. Most of the papers are published. TensorFlow. We got a lot of good, package, open source software and models and things like this. Really, the thing that will matter probably is who has the most data, right? So like, who's going to win self-driving cars? Who's going to have the most training data, right? Who's going to have the most, this is what's going on now. Uber and Tesla and everyone, they're driving around all day and they're doing this stuff. So who and will it be one of those 5 companies, or will it be in an open data repository where people can have access to it, or will it be some other thing? I don't know what the answer is, but there will be, maybe the social networking battle's over, but there will be many more things that matter that will be built on the internet, and like how all these hundreds of millions of devices, IoT and virtual reality and like the metaverse and like I don't know, all these things that I think are going to get built, and like how will they work? How will they be governed? Like I think I'm like, I don't know, I seem like I'm the only person who maybe watched Ready Player One and liked it. I liked it. I don't know, because I spent the whole time thinking about the incentive structure of like, how are you gonna? I know it wasn't a great movie, but I know. But if you're into VR, I liked it. But like the whole time I'm thinking like, okay, with each of those worlds, is Facebook creating all those worlds, or like and how do the virtual goods work, and like who owns them, and like what's the and like I think to get that to be really an exciting. And like I think about it, like, do you want it to end up being like Disneyland, where it's like one company controls the whole thing and it's like kind of this sterile experience or whatever, or do you want it to be like San Francisco or New York City, where it's this exciting, dynamic thing? Like you think about a city, and one of the things that's really works well in a city is you've got a really powerful interaction and balance between public and private spaces, right, in a good city, in a well-functioning city, right? And so you have like good, ideally, like I lived a long time in New York, and I consider New York a good city. So, like a well-functioning, well-balanced city. So you've got, Central Park, and you've got the subways, and you've got the roads, and you've got all this other stuff, and it's publicly owned, and that's very important, right? But that it's like yin and yang. Like the fact that the sidewalk is publicly owned creates the foot traffic that lets the entrepreneur start the restaurant and create a for-profit business. But the two need to coexist. If it's all privately owned, you end up with an amusement park, right? You end up with this sterile, kind of boring, whatever. It's like it's like the airport, lounge or something. It's like all the things owned by one company or something, and it's just like this thing. You want this kind of interactive thing where you let the market play a certain role, but you also need the public infrastructure, right? And so there's a sort of natural balance, and I feel like we have that. We've had that at periods on the web, on the internet, but now I think we're at risk of amusement park land, where it's like it's like 4 channels, NBC, CBS, and ABC or something, and like that would be really depressing. Now the good news is the internet. I think if you guys read like Tim Wu, and there's all these books like this about like how it's depressing. This is kind of the pattern of all media follows the same pattern, right? Which starts off exciting, diverse, creative, and then it ends up being consolidated. I think so. I think that, and that's sort of the pessimistic view. Like, okay, we're just screwed. This is what always happens. It's CBS, ABC, NBC. We're going to be sitting there like zombies watching sitcoms, and that's the future of the internet, right? I think there's a critical difference between the internet and every other kind of network before, which is it's a software-based medium. And so, I mean, obviously there's hardware, but the hardware is, as everyone here knows, it's deliberately designed so that the core, like IP, is a very simple protocol, and that really the logic and the intelligence lives at the nodes, right? And the beautiful thing is the nodes can get upgraded. And so it's a much more plastic, kind of malleable medium than people realize. I would couple that with, I believe software is, I think software is sort of misunderstood as an engineering field and sort of thought of as like, anyone who's worked at like an IT group, the very word IT group suggests that they're sort of a service organization or something like subordinate. I think any company that has an IT group that thinks of that as their tech group is probably already just like screwed, because they don't understand that software is not like a thing where you just sort of hand them a spec and then they build a bridge for you or something. Software is much more like the English language or something, where it's the composability is the key feature. You can take pieces and you can build other pieces out of them. And you can build, you can take a word and you can build a sentence. You can take a sentence, you can build a paragraph, you can put a paragraph, and you can write a novel. And so so the internet can upgrade itself. And this is getting into crypto stuff, but like one of the really interesting things about Bitcoin is, whatever you might think of the other features of it, is the fact that you can write a 9-page paper, which is essentially a paper about incentives, and convince all of these nodes on the internet to go up or change themselves into Bitcoin miners and all these other kinds of things that happen, right? And so the idea that I think of the internet as, with the right incentives and the right software, it can upgrade itself and and new structures can form and grow, and that's a very exciting thing. I think the other thing I'll just say, and I'll stop my speech and do Q&A, but sorry, is that that one of, we can talk about this more, but like I think of one of the really fascinating things about the crypto, kind of the decentralization movement and blockchains, is that you have a really powerful new set. If you believe my metaphor that software is like a novel, or it's like the English language and its composability and it can be rebuilt, you've got this really new interesting set of like software primitives that have now been invented that can be recombined in all these new powerful ways. And I think what it gets me so excited is, I think over the next 2 to 10 years, we're going to see this. I think we have the possibilities, and I think it's going to happen, of just an explosion of creative new ideas. So for example, Bitcoin you have Bitcoin, and then you have sort of this generalization of this concept, which is you have now, through game theory and mathematics, you can take a network of computers and together have a consensus mechanism that then creates trust. With trust, you can construct money, but you can also construct, for example, like virtual goods, like what we call crypto goods and non-fungible tokens. That was a brand new idea. I don't think that idea, as far as I know, that idea didn't really exist prior to 12 months ago. And it's like, hey, you can take this trust thing, you can break, now you have a company doing something related to that, right? Like so, and then that's now going to be, that's going to be recombined and kind of riffed on more and more, and then that's going to be, and there's going to be just sort of layers and layers of kind of stuff happening. Anyways, maybe I'm going on beyond my 10 minutes, so switch to Q&A. But
That's super fascinating. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. So we have basically a bunch of questions that were compiled from the audience. Actually, surprisingly large number of questions about, do you think crypto will succeed, and where are we in that phase? I think maybe to start it off, how did you get interested in Bitcoin and crypto in the beginning?
Yeah, so I'd started a internet security company back in 2004, and had actually looked at, so if you know Hashcash, so Hashcash is sort of one of the proof of work algorithm in Bitcoin, and originally it was a cool idea. Originally, it was way before Bitcoin. It was this idea that if you look at, so I was interested in spam, and like solving the spam. This was 2004. I mean, it was before, now it's all, you have all these great things like the Gmail. It was a bigger problem back then. And then there was phishing and DDoS and all these other kinds of things. And one way to look at those problems is they're kind of free rider or tragedy of the commons problems, right? Where you have essentially the internet wonderfully it's free to make a web request, it's free to send an email. The downside is there are bad actors who abuse that, right? And so the idea with Hashcash is, what if you charged everybody a little bit of money to send prior to Hashcash, what if you charged everybody a 100th of a penny to send an email and to send a web request or something? And the idea would be that the average user would kind of net out, and maybe the service provider would cover the difference, and it wouldn't really matter. But if you're a massive spammer and you're hitting millions of people, then it would destroy your business model, right? So obviously the credit card system can't support that kind of thing, and so then this idea of Hashcash came along, which was, well, what if you charged them through a little computation, right? So you'd said, okay, so you have to solve a little math puzzle, and that would not be would not prohibit the good people from doing it, because it'd be easy. But if you were sending 1 billion emails or something, it would make it cost prohibitive, right? So that was a Hashcash idea. It turned out like that was hard, because it would like punish mobile devices more than big servers and a whole bunch, and whatever. And then it was just like the coordination problem, getting every email client to upgrade and all that kind of stuff. But it was like definitely, like, if you're in security, it was a cool idea, and I thought it was really interesting. And then I remember Bitcoin came out, and Bitcoin used Hashcash, and it was kind of like, let's make them do proof of work. It's Hashcash, and then let's store the proof that you did the Hashcash, and then you have this new thing which kind of solves the problems of Hashcash, because now you can move it around and everything. So but like a lot of people, I thought it was cool, that was interesting, and kind of was like bookmarked it and mentally bookmarked it, and didn't really follow it that much. And then there was sort of this early crypto anarchist community that was into it, and then followed it more, and then kind of around 2012 or so got more serious about it. We invested in Coinbase in 2013, and have done a bunch since then. So. And I think the space is just really, it's really been exciting, especially I'd say sort of post 2015, kind of the rise of Ethereum, and then just sort of a whole bunch of related things around it. Just really kind of, I think it was just sort of major generalization of the ideas, and just inspired a whole new wave of talent. I feel like now, I think we're on kind of wave, I don't know, call it wave 3 of talent now or something, where there's a whole nother set of people entering, which makes me very excited. And I look at the lens a lot through the talent lens of like one of the reasons I'm so excited about NFTs, crypto goods, non-fungible tokens, things like that, is that I think it kind of unlocked another 1 million or 2 people, talent that could enter the space, which are people that are so crypto goods are really, they're just like a cryptographic proof that you own, like a token, except they really just fundamental differences. They have graphics, and they're not interchangeable, but they add graphics, and like that sounds like a small thing, but it got like, I've just talked to a whole bunch of people who were like early games people and media people who were people that were making iPhone games and Facebook games, and they suddenly said, hey, this before this they were like, hey, that crypto thing is kind of interesting, maybe they liked it or didn't, but it was like this money and its protocols, and it's like weird, but hey, now that it has graphics, they're like, oh, I could see someone doing something with that, So it sort of got this other 1 million, 2 million people inspired with it, and it just keeps being. I feel like it's like that. It's like what's that video game? It's Katamari Damacy. Yeah. So it's like that. I feel like it's like that. We're just like rolling down the hill, and like I love that game, but it's like that, and we're just like rolling down the hill, and like every time it rolls, we like collect more. It's like the couch and like the chair, and like but it's like, and then more and more people come. And so like we could talk. There's a whole bunch of challenges, and you could there's a lot of stuff that's not working, but and there's like a lot of people that just there's sort of bad elements of the community and bad actors. There's a whole I'm not trying to sort of say that it's all like simple and good, but I do think the core thing that gets me really excited is just that kind of momentum and the talent and the people entering. I mean, the fact like you're in it, you've recently entered, right? I mean, and I know it made a long time. I was an investor in his last company, but and you were doing non-crypto stuff until recently, and just like it's just more and more. I don't know. I'd love to hear people's perspective here. I feel like there's more and more people, and very importantly, people entering for the right reason. The wrong reason is the get rich quick. The right reason is build cool stuff. I mean, you can get rich too. I'm not anti-capitalism, but I am pro like long-term build value for society capitalism, right? And I think that there's more and more people entering kind of for the right reasons, who are inspired by the technology, who see the possibility, who buy into the ethos.
100%. And it's interesting. That's actually one of the biggest things I tell my friends when I'm trying to convince them about crypto. It's like, if you see where all my smartest friends have gone, it's actually in crypto.
Is that right? That's good to hear.
Yeah, and it's pretty interesting because one of the things that got me personally in was like seeing the big shifts of technology. And I think early last year, when you think about like the personal computer and the internet, and it looks like, to me at least, I was like, wow, this like decentralization could actually be this like third big shift in technology in the recent time frame. And curious, I know a lot of people draw parallels between the internet and crypto, and curious to see like, do you think it is a technology shift of that scale? And if so, like, kind of comparing it to that, where do you think, what year in terms of internet time do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's so hard to compare things to the internet because the internet's sort of it's the big one. I don't know. So like, it's sort of like, I don't know. The way I see it is like I've witnessed the internet, Web 2, I'd call it, which was kind of the rebuilding of the web. So sort of 2002 to, I don't know, 10 or something, and then the smartphone kind of thing, right? And so I sort of feel like I've lived through three, and I believe this is the fourth of those. There are other interesting candidates now. Like there's a lot of interesting stuff in AI. There's a lot of interesting stuff in kind of next-gen computing, which I think of as like VR, AR, self-driving cars, drones, Internet of Things. Just the idea that you'd have kind of recombined computers and put them in all new different places. So there's a lot of exciting stuff. I don't want to sound like the only thing, but I feel like this is. I think just because of the reasons I was saying of sort of the power, like the richness of the design space, the fact that you can kind of come up with like one new combination of software and unlock this whole new part. A friend of mine has this metaphor, the idea maze. You sort of like imagine sort of a startup journey being like you're traveling through a maze. And you have like you run into like a monster as a bad case or pot of gold or something, but like in the way a startup works, like the mistaken way to think about a startup is that it's sort of this static idea and like you just have an idea and you do it. The reality is, as I'm sure a lot of you know as entrepreneurs, is that you're constantly kind of traveling through this maze. Oh man, this is not going to work. Let's try this direction. Maybe at the very end you're like this maze is just a bad maze, or maybe like a new like technology shift happens. You think about like Netflix, and they start off in the DVD maze, and then suddenly the internet broadband gets big enough, and they go and they find a secret door, and they go to find this other maze, and it's like and so it's just the point is it's sort of meant to. But the point of this is meant to. It's a dynamic process where you're exploring, you're learning, but then these things happen that can potentially like enlarge the maze, and so I think of this. What I guess I'm so impressed with the crypto is just the fact that like you can go from Bitcoin. And then like this giant generalization to Ethereum, right, where you add this Turing-complete language and all these other things you can do with smart contracts. And then people riffing off of that to do like, next-gen, internet infrastructure, so stuff like Filecoin and Orchid and all this other stuff. And then you have people building, like what you're building, a compound, like, or can I say, or I don't know. okay. So. Yeah, so he's got we're investors, but he has it's a lending platform kind of smart contract thing. What I find so mind blowing about Compound is you literally, so it's a, can I say, is it okay? Okay. So sorry, I never know what's stealth status or whatever, but so it's a smart contract on Ethereum that it acts like a money market fund where you can either lend money to it and earn interest on your crypto, or you can borrow money from it, right? But what I find so mind-blowing about it is you literally like it's just a piece of code and that's it, and it's just out there, right? I mean, it's on the Ethereum network, but it's kind of out there. I mean, it truly is. It really is kind of the cloud for the first time, and you literally lend money to the contract, and the contract lends money out, and there's just no organization or anything else, and so it's like truly these kind of autonomous organizations, which is I just find it's like an awesome sci-fi kind of futuristic idea, and I think this is, I mean. Lending is an awesome application, but I think there'll be 100 or 1,000 more of these kinds of autonomous organizations that will pop up. And so like just that kind of stuff, and by the way, then you, I don't know if this is, so I might be editorializing here, but like you add a stable, instead of Ethereum, you make it a stable coin, and then it feels like then it's like $1 essentially, and then you add a nice UI onto it. Next thing you know, you've got a replacement for Citibank's core service or something. Like, so it's not that many steps you need for this to actually get to be like a mainstream product that takes, you think about Citibank's core business is, I don't know, I have a Citibank account. I think they pay me like 0 or I don't know 0.2% interest. I don't know what the checking account interest rate is, but it's not very good. And meanwhile, they lend money out at 17% or whatever. And now some of that is because they have to pay for defaults, but they take about 8-9 points just for being Citibank, right? And so anyone who's been involved in fintech, this, that cost of capital is the hardest thing of a fintech startup because you're competing against these companies that have a 0 cost of capital and you have to go borrow money from hedge funds at 8% or some 10%. Anyway, so like, something like that, like a compound plus a stable coin plus a slick, iPhone UI is suddenly like, it becomes really kind of interesting and disruptive. And so just the kind of richness of the space and the design space and just the fact that you can have this kind of new thing that just unlocks like this whole new kind of section of the maze and then gets more talent in, and that's the kind of the snowball thing where it's like the talent begets the new kind of the new software component kind of idea generation, which in turn begets more talent and that. So where are we in the internet? I mean, it's a good question. Like it depends where you, like, first of all, I don't know where we are in crypto. Like I would say we're kind of Bitcoin's almost 10 years old, but I kind of feel like the modern era started in 2015, right? I mean, because till then it was a lot of just like crypto anarchists and like, it was Bitcoin was going to be like a payment system or store of value, but this idea, this giant leap in generalization of this is going to be any arbitrary software really started in 2015. So I kind of feel like we're 2 to 3 years into crypto. And even then, and then a lot of the projects just raise money doing ICOs and haven't launched yet. And so like a whole bunch of stuff is in the queue that hasn't launched. So these are really hard things to write. You know better than me, but like I think we talk about the kind of 90-10 rule in smart contracts where the last 10% is just math is like it's like Pareto principle 80-20, but even more so. Like because if you go get the security wrong or anything else, you're just like, oh my god, like you guys probably read about some of the bugs and hacks and stuff. And so you just really got to get it right because this is like this code that lives on its own. It's this, it's like you've created this thing and it's out there, and so it just takes a lot of time. And so a lot of stuff's just in the queue right now. I feel like we're kind of a little bit in a waiting pattern. So I don't know. It's also like where with the internet, you can start with Netscape, you can start with or with Tim Berners-Lee in the web, or you can start with ARPANET. Depends where you start. I don't know. So it's hard to say. But I think also the other thing I think is very important is this is the internet. One reason the internet took so long is you had to build out the hardware, right? You had to build out like a key thing with the internet was broadband. And for those who weren't old enough, like first of all, this whole idea of the internet was like really great in the 90s. I don't think those people lived in the 90s. In fact, one thing I recommend to do is go watch movies from the 90s if those who weren't like around like using computers then. And like basically the internet doesn't exist, and there's no smartphones, and no one's like, oh, I saw it on the web or whatever. Those phrases don't occur. And then occasionally you'll see them and they'll go and it'll be like this ritual, like I'm going to go on the internet. And like this is only like in like 3 movies, like You've Got Mail and The Net and like something else. I did this one weekend. They go on and it's like the beeping sound and like they go on and then like the images literally like you choose like, okay, do I want my images to load really slowly like whatever it's called, like linearly, or like where they fade in because it was like that slow. Was it the rendering? What is it? Yeah. And so, and it was like that bad, right? And really the only thing anyone used it for was email. And there was all these like famous like studies that like, oh, if no one's gonna ever upgrade to broadband because why would you, they actually did like McKinsey did all these surveys and people were like, no, would you pay $20 a month for broadband? No, because why would I want faster email? Like, because that was the only thing you really use it for. And so like you think about all stuff today and like almost everything requires broadband, video, everything else. And so, but to get broadband, you had to literally like, Comcast or whatever had to come and like cut a hole in the ground and like put up towers, and like that took a long time. And then we had to get smartphones and better computers and all these other things. The great thing now, which I think is where the analogy, what makes me optimistic, is it's all just software, right? So like you can go, on the one hand, I can get depressed. Like if you go and you look at the experience of trying to use a DApp or something, right? You got to like go get your Ether and like transfer it over to MetaMask or whatever, and you got to like remember your 12-word brain wallet. Like the whole thing's just ridiculous. Like it's not a mainstream user experience. On the other hand, the good news is it's all just software, right? It's not that much. It's not going to take that many smart people to fix that. We don't have to go lay cables. We don't have to go and like manufacture stuff. Like the hardware's good enough. It's a software problem, and so that makes me feel like it could go much faster.
Yeah, that's awesome. And definitely kind of empathize with trying to remember your brain while in MetaMask and all that stuff.
It's not a mainstream. Most of the stuff is not a mainstream user experience right now.
I remember the first time my co-founder Joe and I tried to invest in ICO. I think it was more than a year and a half ago, and we both have artificial intelligence degrees from Stanford, and we could not figure this out. It was like 4 a.m. We had to call our friends.
That's the thing. I've had so many conversations with people, and they're like, it's really bad that all these regular investors on in Florida are getting losing all their money in ICOs. And whenever they say that, it's like, have you ever tried to invest in ICO? You get this long hexadecimal address. You just send this thing with you have to download all these things. I don't believe it. I think the only people that mostly who did this were programmers, because you kind of have to be a programmer to do it. And by the way, I think if you know how to download that and program that, you're probably a savvier investor than a accredited investor, right? It's probably a better test, in some ways. I don't know, but. Anyways, I don't want. That said, I don't think people should do unregulated ICOs. And so.
The SEC is watching. What do you think? So, kind of diving in, Ethereum. We got a bunch of questions about this. Ethereum has kind of been the poster child so far the last couple of years. We see a lot of competition rising up, and questions about scalability and a bunch of other things. How do you think, both kind of on a global scale and kind of individual country adoption, these different competitors will do against Ethereum?
Well, so as people probably know, the big question with Ethereum is awesome in many ways. The big question, I think, is mostly around scalability. And what that means, there's a couple things that means. That means both throughput, so it handles about, I think it's 1.2 million transactions a day, and that's not even close to what we need for web scale. There's also issues around transaction finality. It just takes too long to know something's done and other kinds of things. On the good news is there's a lot of stuff going on to fix that, including everything from what's happening at the kind of core protocol, sort of layer 1 core protocol. So that's the upgrade to Casper and sharding and just general improvement. I think there are improvements to the the VM and a whole bunch of other things. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff happening at sort of so-called layer 2. The obvious thing is sort of state channels, which is look, it's kind of almost everything in computer science, as people know, is you get scalability through basically two things. You either shard, you get parallelism, or you cache, right? And so sharding is obviously is parallelism, and plasma is parallelism, and then state channels and other things are kind of caching and things. And so there's a bunch of stuff happening that make me optimistic. I also just wonder, there's also there's a lot of cool stuff. I feel like I learn about a new thing every week. This stuff going on with Starks, if you know about that, is this cryptographic zero knowledge proof method that lets you essentially do computations off the blockchain and only use the blockchain for verifying computations, which makes a lot of sense. It's kind of if it's just you only need it's the trust layer. You only need it for doing kind of the trust level things and verifying the computations. Why have a network of 30,000 computers all run redundant computations when you don't need to? So there's a lot going on there. But I think, and as you said, there's a whole bunch of people trying to create kind of new smart contract platforms. And there's a lot of interesting innovation there. It'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. Some of the better ideas might be, kind of could be co-opted by Ethereum, since everything's sort of open data and open source. On the flip side, a lot of people are building these new things to be compatible. They'll use the Ethereum virtual machine. They'll, do a whole bunch of things. So they're trying to lower the switching costs, while Ethereum could eventually kind of take some of the ideas. It certainly has the momentum. Just the developers I meet, it's 90+% or Ethereum. It's the thing that's working and fully programmable. I think we won't really know until we have kind of killer apps built on top, right? Because I think what will happen is you'll have apps on top that really get traction and need to scale and can't scale. And if at that point Ethereum is ready, Ethereum will probably win. And if at that point Ethereum isn't and something else is, those apps might become kingmakers, right? Imagine, just by analogy, 2011, 10, and there's Android and Windows Phone and whatever Nokia had and Android and something. And imagine if those platforms had sort of scaling limitations, and Instagram and WhatsApp and other kind of apps that users really wanted could decide which platform to make. They probably could have been kingmakers, right? And so until we have those apps, I think we don't really know. So I think of it as kind of a horse race between those apps getting built, which I think will hopefully happen in the next year or two, and Ethereum kind of catching up on the scaling side. And I wouldn't underestimate. It's a great, Vitalik is brilliant. The whole team is brilliant. There's a lot of people working around it. I wouldn't bet against it. But there's, it's good. There's a lot of other innovation. It's just exciting to see like all the stuff going on there. So.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue actually into one of the other questions we got from the comments. So it's pretty interesting because crypto in general has like a pretty broad awareness around the world. I was actually in Africa recently, the motherland. Well, not like my motherland from Texas, but basically like even like our cab drivers knew about Bitcoin, right? But the counter argument is that so far we still don't have like a killer app for crypto. And kind of 10 years, the question was like 10 years into the web, we had websites that were popular and being used. But what do you think, like when do you think that'll happen? And what do you think that first killer app will be?
Bitcoiners would say that there is a killer app, which is Bitcoin as a store of value. So there's that argument, right? And look, for that use case, it does work well. And I think, I think if you're living in a country, I think there are something like 20 countries with 20% plus inflation and countries with capital controls and other, look, it's been around for 10 years. It's never been hacked. It works. You can debate people have their endless websites and tribal wars debating these various facts, as you all know. But I think you could argue that Bitcoin has product market fit as a digital store of value. I also think Ethereum has product market fit as at a minimum as a crowdfunding platform. I mean, I sort of think of like people in AI always complain that every time AI solves something, people redefine AI to be something else. So in other words, 50 years ago, you said, I can build a machine that can beat you in chess. Chess is sort of the canonical smart people game. And people would have said, wow, that would be a pretty intelligent machine. Then you beat it, like, it's just a bunch of algorithms. Like, it's not. Like, let's say you go and drive a car, or whatever. And so people in AI joke about that. I feel like a little bit like that with Ethereum. To build, crowdfunding has always been considered, like, at least since I've been around, like, Kickstarter and GoFundMe, like a very legitimate, startup category. And Ethereum built, the fact that people sent, I don't know how many billions of dollars it's been now, to a random piece of code and trusted the piece of code would send them some token and they trust the tokens and everything else. Like that seems, I think that qualifies as product market fit. So I think those are two things that have worked. But yeah, I think it's very, if that were the end state, that would not satisfy the dream or the hype that's been around it. So I've come to believe, like stable coins, for example. So this idea, I've come to believe that main stream like kind of mainstream users interacting. I just think it would be a huge kind of user experience improvement if we had the ability to have cryptographic assets that were pegged to things like the dollar. I just think that's how regular users think. That's how I think. I go to Europe, I'm like, okay, wait, what is that in dollars or whatever? Like people, unit of account. That's the three uses of money. Store value means of exchange. Unit of account, like unit account's like how you think about it. Like I just think people like fundamentally think in one unit of account, and that's dollars, and that's what they try, and that's what your taxes are paid in, your rent is paid in, and everything else. And so I think getting a point where we can have real crypto assets that work like that, and we've invested in a bunch of them, and there's a whole bunch of innovation going on there, and I'm optimistic. But I think that would be, for example, like a major user experience improvement that would unlock a whole bunch of things. Like I think that's, I don't know, like, as an example. But so I think there have been some at least those two examples of product market fit. But certainly there's a lot more work to do.
Awesome. I'm going to pause real quick. Does anybody have questions from the audience? And otherwise, I'll continue. Yeah.
So apart from regulation, how do you think we can change the incentive design for crypto exchanges to actually try to prevent criminal activity?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Well, so I do think that I'm sure there's criminal activity, as there is on the internet, as there is with smartphones, as there is, I do feel like the press has emphasized that to a greater degree than is the reality. So, for example, I think most people that I talk to are very, who've read mainstream press are very surprised to learn that neither Bitcoin nor Ethereum has ever been hacked. Right? That the things, the things have been hacked are, exchanges and other kinds of centralized organizations built on top of it. There's lots of studies, like that study recently that came out that said that people had used Tether to manipulate the price of Bitcoin was immediately debunked. Most of the studies I've seen that have alleged that the Bitcoin price is fake and it's mostly used for criminal activity, like most of them I don't think are good studies, have not had good evidence behind them. Look, but that said, like I'm not naive. Like criminals use, presumably criminals use smartphones, and I don't know what they use, Android or iPhone. I'm sure they use encryption. By the way, you should go back in the 90s. Like encryption was a very, very controversial topic in the 90s. My partners Ben and Mark were, they were at Netscape. Netscape was considered a munition. It couldn't be exported outside the. They had to go in front of Congress, like other things, because of SSL. Netscape introduced JavaScript. By the way, some people knows. They invented JavaScript. They invented SSL. They invented cookies. SSL was by far the most controversial thing. SSL absolutely, like so many people, in the government and other places were convinced. Why would you want to encrypt the data? Of course, they wanted to encrypt it to enable commerce and things like this. But there was this very heated debates around encryption, right? And I'm sure, look, the reality is I'm sure that criminals do use encryption, but I think we all agree that, at least I think that encryption by and large has a positive effect on society. It allows people to have privacy. It's a better security model. I think it's like, to me, it's like all technologies, I think, not all, but a lot of technologies, at least information technologies, I think have some negative criminal use cases. I think that they, hopefully, and I think in most cases do have many more positive use cases. I think it's the same thing is true here. I don't know, but are you thinking of specific things, like specific?
Yeah, so right now it would only be regulation that would prevent criminal activities or would make a company actually check.
Yeah, but it's also very heavily, like Coinbase is a very heavily regulated organization. I think this is like so for example, and I've been on the board for 5 years, like it's half the conversation at the board meetings. It's a massive focus in the organization. They have to follow, every customer has to be KYC'd. It has to be, you have to know the customer, right? IDs, everything else. They do anti-money laundering, anti-fraud. They're under FinCEN regulation. They're under SEC and CFTC. There's like 12 different there's New York DFS. There's a whole bunch of regulatory stuff, and I think the general view the regulators have had is you regulate these things at the fiat rails, right? So like, if you want to send, if someone wants to use Monero to send money to somebody in another country and use it for criminal activity, at some point that person is going to need to convert that into fiat using rail, and those rail points are heavily regulated. The other thing to note is like a lot of people originally when email started, oh my God, email's anonymous. You can go to Yahoo and you can sign up as whatever foo@yahoo.com. I think you talk to law enforcement now, it's their best friend, right? Because you now have a digital trail. You can subpoena the computer. You can go see what's on there. I think the same thing will end up happening here, which is it'll be like email. It's anonymous in the sense you can sign up as a random person, but the reality is law enforcement has the ability to raid places, take computers, subpoena computers, do all sorts of things, and that having a digital paper trail versus cash, offline cash, will actually probably help them in a lot of I don't know. Like maybe I'm overly optimistic about it, but I just think that narrative is. I think it's important, and regulation is very important, and you need to have a balance between innovation and regulation. But I think the narrative that crypto is only used for or primarily used for illicit activities I just would disagree.
Chris, what do you think are the top 3 kind of projects or maybe like areas that you're interested in seeing in the space? I know you mentioned stablecoins and NFTs, but can you elaborate on those?
Yeah, well, like NFTs. So this is, you guys know this, like crypto kitties and crypto goods and like these kinds of ideas. I think what's so cool about that is a couple of things. So one, maybe just I think that this should be an amazing time for creative people on the internet, right? It should be, if you're a musician, if you're a writer, if you make video games, you now have an audience of 4 billion going to more people who are highly engaged. You have all sorts of interesting new business models. The fundamental problem for those people is they're going through intermediaries who take all the money, basically, right? And so you take like musicians and they go through Spotify, and it's not just Spotify, by the way. Spotify gets blamed too much. It's really like if you actually look at the money flow, most of it goes to the labels. But and they make most of their money off of musicians, as I understand now, off of offline shows and merchandising and things like this. And so, like, having the idea of having scarce digital goods, for me, seems like a really interesting thing that could be a new way to create experiences and business models for musicians, for writers, for video games, for a whole bunch of other things that can create the kind of same scarcity that how they monetize in the offline world and the online world. As an example, I think we're just at the very beginning of that. I think we'll see a lot more experimentation around it. So I just want to make that point because I think there's more, like you can like say, oh, it's virtual goods, it's silly or something, but like, hey, business model for musicians, like, that matters, right? Like these things do matter because you need those things to, finding a good business model for writers and journalism is a very important topic, right? I don't think we can just have it be all funded by, philanthropy and billionaires and things. Like I think it would be much better to have self-sustainable models there. And I just, I guess I'm just on a business model optimist, I guess, because I've been doing this long enough. Like I remember just people absolutely certain, like the venture world in 2008 was absolutely certain that games were a terrible category, right? Terrible category. You can't monetize. There's websites. I'm going back now. Congregate and all these other things. And the model was you play these games and then they have these banner ads. You remember this, right? And so there were banner ads and it was like really crappy CPMs and it was like Yahoo Games. Remember this? It's like you play chess and it's like banner ads, pop-ups, like this and that, right? And I remember, okay, and then they were like, oh, there's this, in Asia, they're starting to use virtual goods, but it'll never work in the US, this and that. Micropayments, they'll never work. People don't like the cognitive overhead. Lots of long think pieces and blog posts about why micropayments will never work. Like fast forward today, like League of Legends, $2.5 billion in revenue last year selling virtual goods. Half people here maybe know, but most audiences don't know League of Legends, right? $2.5 billion in revenue last year on virtual goods, and they're cosmetic good. I don't know if you play League of Legends. Like it's literally like you can't even buy goods that make you better at the game. It's or Fortnite. People know Fortnite probably. You buy emotes. Like it's like a dance move. They made $300 million last month on dance moves, right? So like anyone who tells me that like anytime someone says, oh, it's ridiculous that musicians would monetize through virtual goods, I'm like the only thing more ridiculous is the actual reality that today people. Like, there's a video game that made $300 million on dance moves, and you're telling me my prediction is ridiculous? Like, I mean, so, and I've just seen this happen too. I remember, like, oh, you'll never make money. Social networks, 2010, Google it, 2010, Business Insider had a long, 2010, Business Insider had a long piece about how Facebook should just become a nonprofit because there will never be a business model for social networks. Google that, and you will see it. 2010, I'm not trying to make fun of Business Insider or the writer. I think I'm just trying to explain that was sort of the zeitgeist among a lot of smart people at the time, or whatever, the general feeling, bunch of smart people at the time. That was 2010. They should just hang it up and become a nonprofit. Like Barron's, when they went public, had this big down thing, the business model sucks, everything else, $500 billion, whatever it is, market cap, like massive money machine. So all of these things, like now you hear, oh, journalism is over, oh, music's over. Like, I just don't believe that. I think we just haven't found the right model yet. And I've seen it too many times. And like, the bottom line is like the fundamental thing, right? Is that like think about it. Like the fundamental supply and demand is in place, which is like people like to create music and like to write things, and people like to listen to music, and they like it a lot, and they'll pay for it if you figure out a way to do it, right? And the problem is this: everything in the middle is screwed up. And so if we can fix the stuff in the middle, we can fix the endpoints, I think. Anyway, so I just want to make that point because I think sometimes like the crypto kitties and all this other stuff, it's like, oh, this silly thing and it's games and it's like waste of time, and like I think things like that can anyways lead to business models for all sorts of things can then have all these kind of second order positive effects. So that's a very interesting area. I think the kind of crypto finance, so that's the kind of what Compound is doing. There's a whole bunch of stuff around like decentralized exchange, there's derivatives platforms and other things, and fundamentally like I like those to the extent, I don't think we need more speculation in this world. I think there's more than enough speculation in the crypto world. But I think these things, what they're kind of doing is they're building crypto native financial services, which initially will, I bet you your early customers will be crypto traders, and they'll be borrowing ETH. So they'll lend ETH to make money on their ETH, and they'll borrow I don't know what, Tron, so they can short it or something. And so or whatever, I'm not picking on Tron, but yeah, it should be probably a pretty good one. So initially it will be kind of crypto traders, right? But then you'll add a stable coin, then you'll do this, and next thing you know, like a smart entrepreneur will come along and say, hey, I've got this cool lending platform, right? So I think it'll have this kind of inside out I think about this a lot, like kind of the adoption pattern. It won't be like one day you just go to crypto bank instead of Citibank. It'll be more like just more and more of the use cases sort of end up becoming, it just seems less relevant because you just do more stuff on the internet and you have these crypto kind of native, internet native ways to do things, right? And sort of like, you know, it's not like, you know, I don't know, you think about a lot of things that so far have happened on the internet. So, you know, I don't know what, like Google and Encyclopedia and Wikipedia. It's not like you know, overnight. Like what happens is you just start searching and using it, and next thing you know, these other things just become kind of less relevant. So, anyways, it's a little bit like also the way social networks evolved. Like Twitter back in the early days, it was mostly kind of, you know, it was really kind of the enthusiasts, the Web 2 enthusiasts or whatever, and people that were into this stuff. And then it took, you know, 6-7 years for kind of more mainstream people to enter. So crypto finance is really interesting. The infrastructure, I do spend a lot of time on infrastructure, this kind of consensus mechanism, scaling, et cetera. What else is interesting? I think the whole kind of developing world aspect is very interesting. So there's something on the order, I've tried to get good statistics on this, but it's on the order of like 1 billion people have, you know, smartphone. You can get an Android phone now for $14. That's going to go to $5, probably $3 or something, right? So, and I've used them. The $14 Android, it's pretty good. I mean, it's like it's a good phone, and it just like an Android phone, and like, you know, these things have gotten so amazingly cheap. So you get a $14 Android phone, and then like we have this investment in a company called Cello that's doing it's a Venmo for the developing world using, you know, crypto assets. And why do you need that? Because those billion people who don't have bank accounts also don't have identities. And so if you think about how, and so the advantage of building this using crypto concepts is that the payment is a bearer instrument, right? Meaning that the recipient can verify that he or she got it through mathematical methods and not having to ping a third party, because that recipient is not able to ping a third party because they don't have an existing relationship with the bank, right? So it's almost like, it's literally like digital gold. You can hand, like gold in theory, if you're a chemist or whatever, you can take the gold and you can say, I got the gold, I don't have to ping a third party. And so it's doing that, but with digital goods. And so that is a very powerful way to use kind of this, what some people see as a negative of Bitcoin, that if you like steal the key or whatever, it's gone forever. It's a bearer instrument. It's a very positive case in that case. So I think that's very interesting. Just generally, like, you know, I think that I could imagine that kind of getting popular and then kind of, you know, spreading out beyond that. What else is exciting? I think I don't know what else. I think there's. I'll just throw this out there. I think people are underestimating what you could potentially do with what I would call hybrid architectures. So. I don't know. This is maybe it's a longer conversation, but like I think, for example, you could do. I think people are thinking that if you wanted to create a crypto competitor to Twitter, for example, that you'd have to do it. Like there are some examples, like PeepETH and a few others or whatever. And the way they're doing it is they're actually building the whole thing where everything gets stored on the blockchain. Whereas I think if you actually go and look at how a lot of Web 1 protocols worked, they were actually much more federated. And so, you know, so SMTP, the email protocol, right? So that, you know, it's a decentralized quote unquote protocol, but when you actually use, you know, Gmail, it's a centralized service, right? But the service is kept in check by, you know, Gmail may have gotten so big that they have power over SMTP, but until then, Hotmail or whatever, some Outlook, the service is kept in check. It's not going to start kind of putting ads everywhere and ruining the user experience, because you can always leave. You can exit. And why can you exit? Because you can go to your DNS and change your MX record and like exit, because they have that core layer, the naming layer is decentralized, but the rest of it is centralized, right? And that was to me, it's a very important insight, because it says that there's certain kind of political PowerPoints that, you know, like certain points at which if you decentralize just that point, you get the benefits of decentralization, but then you can centralize the other pieces of it, right? And I think we're just beginning to explore those design patterns. So like I always think, like, why isn't what's it called? What is it? I forget the name now. Is that open source Slack thing? It's really cool. I'm forgetting. It's named. What's that? It's the one named after like woolly mammoth, or what's it called? Mastodon. Yeah, Mastodon. Yeah. like Mastodon, like it's really cool, right? So it's like a open source Slack kind of thing. It's just software though, right? But the problem is there's no centralized namespace, right? So I'm Chris at whatever random server name, and then so you end up with all these little fragmented communities and things like this. But it would be like a kind of a small step to take Mastodon and add like a centralized naming service and a centralized friends list, and next thing you know, you have this really cool kind of open architecture kind of thing. I don't know. So I think those areas generally of kind of what I would call kind of hybrid. Like I'm still waiting for that to happen. I feel like one problem with the crypto world right now is it's very kind of isolated, and that you're either crypto or not. But the way and sometimes some of my friends in the world are like, oh, we don't want those new people to enter. They're not crypto native. But I think it's the opposite, which is we need them to enter, and we want to work together, and we want to like I really want to get like one thing that really frustrates me is that a lot of the original open source folks like Linux and just all the hardcore open source people, a lot of them I think got really turned off by the kind of right-wing branding around Bitcoin. A lot of the early branding was this kind of like libertarian right-wing kind of thing, and like just a lot of the open source people come from, because of the history of it, open source came out of like the free software movement and Richard Stallman and all of that. And so we're sort of turned off by it, and I think have missed the fact that the space has transformed itself and is not that anymore. It's really not right or left. It's a technology movement. And I think at some point, I would love to see more and more like just projects on GitHub and things starting to incorporate these kinds of hybrid architectures and see these concepts kind of eat their way into other things. Because I don't think we're going to get there. Like if you want to have a game that uses crypto goods and other things, like we don't want to rebuild the whole tool chain. Like you got to still use Unity and everything else, and so.
To that point, you raised your comment earlier about Congregate failing 10, 15 years ago. They never built an audience. But then maybe pre-League of Legends, the better example, and Amit just left, but is Zynga. Yeah. They pillaged Facebook, but made billions of dollars a year. Now we're looking at... But got booted and screwed. They tried to steal their audience and failed. But now we're looking at CryptoKitties with 200 DAO. And should we be asking ourselves, if you believe this hybrid thesis, that really we need a Facebook platform 2.0, and maybe the only person capable of doing it today is Coinbase, because at least they have 40 million people with something in a wallet. Where are the next crypto game going to run? And because it's not really working yet.
It's not working yet, no, but it's still. I mean, it's like I think it's still very early. Yeah.
But should we be building things right now to jumpstart it? Coinbase has like 3 engineers on Toshi. Like, should we invest more in things like that?
Well, I think there's 2 questions embedded in that, though, right? I think there's distribution and there's code, right? Like I'm feeling pretty good on the codes. Like there's a lot of smart people building good code right now, and like building. And so there's Toshi, and there's a bunch of other things like that, and there's a bunch of smart people doing it. And I'm feeling pretty good on that side. The distribution side is another question, right? Where we have because it is hard outside of the big incumbents. And that's one reason I think getting these ideas. Proselytizing the ideas to, shouldn't existing game companies start thinking about this stuff and other kinds of things like that, right? Yeah.
Succeeds on their little small project.
On their crypto project. Yeah.
Are they just going to build a Facebook platform crypto thing?
Yeah, but like games is a good example where I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know that. I don't live in that world, but like my sense is that there's enough. If you built the right experience, there's enough. There's enough distribution channels that you could go and get aggregate an audience pretty quickly. Yeah.
I have a somewhat related question. Honestly, I missed the first wave of crypto. I missed the second wave of crypto because I'm not a speculator. I would say I'm in the category of the third wave of crypto that you talk about.
Yeah.
And the thing that I can't wrap my head around is like, I feel like we're constantly putting the cart before the horse in crypto. Like the only thing that has made sense to me so far is this like hybrid model that you're talking about, that everything cannot be decentralized. Like every time I hear a crypto company, my first question is, why does this need to be decentralized? Because it's expensive. Like if you're a technical person, decentralization is expensive. Like why would you pay that expense? And like the only model that makes sense to me is this hybrid model. But the other thing that I often think about is, I think it's even a statement that you made in the past in one of your posts, is this two phases of product market fit. Like, it's so hard to get one phase right. Like, how the hell are you going to get two phases right? And then the third piece of it is that the internet worked because there was a convergence on the protocols. Like, I just don't see like anybody agreeing, anyone converging, anybody moving like towards a single direction. I feel like everyone's competing, everyone's like launching their own protocols. Like, you know, like there's just like no concept of convergence in this ecosystem. So, I mean, it goes back a little bit to what Aaron is saying. Like, why are we talking about apps and games and distribution till you figure out how you're going to get the ecosystem, the platform right in the first place?
Yeah, those are good questions. So, I mean, I think there's some. I mean, like I think, like, so for example, like when you say the platform, like for example, like the smart contract platform, like Ethereum, yeah, there's a lot of like there does seem to be a lot. I mean, modulo the giant scaling question, which hasn't been solved yet. I think for example, there's a lot of convergence on Ethereum right now, and so yeah. But I think you're right. There's too many people. Like there's this whole gold rush thing going on where there's like building your own layer one platform. You can have a token and your people value you much more highly. And so there are too many people, But I think of it as like it's just like any wave in technology. There's waves where you have a whole bunch of little startups and you have kind of consolidation. I think we'll probably see that. But I think in the next year or two we'll have kind of like on the smart contract side some convergence. And it may be Ethereum, maybe something else. Most likely Ethereum. I don't know. Yeah, you're right. There's a fundamental trade you make when you build a blockchain between performance and what I would call trust, right? Which is you get these. The idea with something like Ethereum is because of the cryptographic mathematical properties, and because of the game theoretic properties of how proof of work or else proof of stake will work, you can trust the network as a whole, even if some of the participants are adversarial, right? And so if you're Robert building a lending platform, knowing that if I lend money to that piece of code is going to pay me back, it's worth making that trade, right? Because you don't really, in that case, the performance is not that big of a headache, but making sure I get paid is a big deal, right? And so that's a point at which it's worth making that trade. So finance is an area where money and finance, and then like maybe the management of virtual goods layer, it makes a lot of sense. Like anything where you want to, like I believe that the two things I own on the internet that I believe will exist in 50 years from now are my domain names and my crypto assets. Like my CryptoKitty I have CryptoKitty 15, and I will have that.
How much has it appreciated?
I think it's gone up and down. I don't know what the market value is, but like I have that, and I will like just like I've owned a bunch of domains forever, and I will always keep them, and I will like. I don't know, like whatever. I just think that like, and you will own it. Because there will be, as long as there's a copy of the Ethereum blockchain, like those goods will exist, and you will own them. And like nothing else, everything else you have online today, is going to be changed, is going to be taken away. There's no notion of like any kind of permanence. That is a deep level of trust. So that's a very powerful thing. I agree that you make a trade-off, and these systems are not like it's by definition. I mean, Ethereum, you're running 30,000 whatever it is machines, all running the same code. It's not. It's this game theoretical thing built for trust, right? And so we need to discover what is the right trade-offs you'd make. When do you need trust and when do you not need trust? And what are the new applications you can build using that capability, that new primitive of trust, right? And so it makes sense for money. It makes sense for payments. It makes sense for property rights. It makes sense probably for things like naming, like sort of a DNS type things. It doesn't make sense for anything that is performance, like highly compute intensive and doesn't require trust, right? And so I think we're just, I mean, like again, like I think we're really early, really like it's really early. There, it's only been a couple of years, 2015 Ethereum launched, I think, and really like came to public consciousness in 2016, and probably came to the people in the valley, probably another wave of engineers in the last 12 months. So it's really early in sort of figuring out the design patterns and what you can do with it. I don't know.
Cool. So while computation on Ethereum itself is decentralized, there's actually no guarantee that the programs written on there are themselves decentralized. For example, like with the parity bug, right? There's a central point of control, and everyone's wallet was essentially broken, right? My first question is, how much of an existential risk do you think that is, and how realistic do you think it is that we actually may end up in a worse situation? For example, like if there was some, digital USD master contract that gets hacked and everyone's funds are just like lost.
I don't actually know. Was a parity bug? I thought that was like a race condition or something. What was the bug? Was it a point of centralization, or
it was a point of centralization? So basically, if you sent a value to the master contract, it just like broke everyone's wallets essentially. And there's actually strong forces. I keep seeing this in other smart contracts. So given the inefficiencies of decentralization and gas costs, right, people are more and more incentivized to just write these master contracts, right, that just handle a bunch of stuff, right, which increases the risk because you're centralizing all the complexity of the code, and you're starting to use an inheritance, which decreases visibility of the code because you don't know how things are going to combine, right? And then I think the second question, which is somewhat related, and hopefully it's not too much. It seems like there's more and more of a trade-off for features such as like trusted computation by using like SGX, for example, right? How much of a risk do you think that is, given that like if everyone just decides to do computation in Enclave, at the end of the day, we're just trusting Intel, right? Which is at large decentralization. Okay, wait. So the first part was that. What was the question? So there? The first one there is like, how like is there a way to incentivize programs which themselves are decentralized, right? There's a centralizing force of the programs while computation itself is decentralized, right? It doesn't actually guarantee decentralization, right?
Yeah, I think, well, I guess I would distinguish between a bug and a, like, so I think of like the CryptoKitties had this controversy because they had this flag for upgrading, and that flag was controlled by the company, and that's a point of centralization, and that's what, as I think about it, like, these people like I think maybe like Open Zeppelin and a few other projects are trying to kind of solve through these kind of more governance community models for upgrading flags. And so I think there's ways to remove those centralization points, right? So you essentially have like a voting model or something for like when you're going to upgrade the code. So I think there's methods for that, and it's kind of a tooling thing. Like we just don't have the right, like a lot of the tools are just like the fact that everyone's writing this stuff from scratch. There aren't enough templates. Like people should be doing much more like templated stuff. There's debates around like whether is Solidity the right language, right? I think everyone's now moving to like WebAssembly with different compilers, and you'd have like formal verification, and you'd probably have a whole bunch of code patterns and a tool chain, and like so that's a lot of this stuff is missing. I mean, this is why we need Silicon Valley to come do this, what they did with a bunch of other kind of developer stacks, because it just hasn't happened here yet, right? And every developer I talk to, it's like in Solidity, is like, oh my god, like. I love this stuff, but wow, this I don't know. It sounds like you do this stuff, so like you know better than me. But okay, so I mean, everyone I talk to who's actually programming and stuff, because I don't do much. I mean, I've looked at it, but is saying that the tools are just really bad. So I think a lot of it's just like, and I hope that gets fixed. And it seems like a bunch of people are working on it. And then the second question,
basically just like the trade-offs. So there's. You can get like certain features out of making trade-offs with like basically like you can get performance improvements out of like trusting some parties, or like you can get like private computation, right, in an enclave if you trust Intel,
SGX,
right?
Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of the idea of trusting Intel like SGX, right? Like I think the Stark method is much. So have you seen the Stark stuff, like the stuff out of Israel? You get a similar idea, which is you can have a third-party machine doing computation and sending back, and then the blockchain just does verification. And the verification has the feature that it's compute intensive to do the computation and relatively easy to verify it, and so that removes a lot of the gas costs and things. The nice thing there is you're trusting math, not Intel, right? Yeah, I don't love the idea of trusting Intel. I think that whole idea, especially after Spectre meltdown, like, right? I mean, it seems like. I don't know. I mean, like we build this whole. It just feels very off to me that we're going to like build this whole decentralized world. And one thing we depend on is. I mean, if you're going to trust Intel, we might as well just trust Google too while we're at it, and Amazon, and then just build like. I mean, but actually, in all seriousness, like you could imagine Google saying, "We're running a compute verified by Google, and we will put the Google stamp on that the computation that you submitted is the one being run," and like that's to me is as trustworthy as SGX. And it might be a model that works for certain use cases. I don't think it's the long-term kind of, the answer here for like a lot of the stuff we want to see built. I think that the mathematical stuff going on is probably more exciting, because you could have, like, as I understand the way that the Stark model like works, is you can have provers who are like third parties or even closed source or whatever, and they're running computations, and then and you don't have to ever know exactly what they're doing, but you can mathematically verify they ran the right computation. I think anytime you add, it's like the weakest link kind of principle. Like, you can only trust so much as the weakest link, and like, so yeah. I mean, I think the secure enclave stuff it's great for key management, right? I mean, like the idea of generating your private public keys on a secure enclave. Generally, I'm a fan of that and HSMs, and just like as a security model. It's good. It's just isolation, right? So you isolate the key generation module from the rest of the operating system, and that lowers the attack surface, and that's just that's like apple pie and whatever. Of course, you want to lower the attack surface. Like, that's a different use case than the SGX Trust Intel for my core blockchain uses. I don't know. That's my.
So this is something that has confused me for a while, that I haven't heard anyone in the decentralization sort of mantra talk about, is if all of this is still sort of running, at the base on the internet, where do ISPs sort of play in the role of sort of decentralization at large? And like, what do you think?
Oh, do you mean like, could Comcast shut all this down? With
yeah, exactly. Like, could this whole
operation
operation be just for naught, and Comcast, Time Warner are all like, nope.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, I do think. I mean, like, the reality is we don't have real competition, especially last mile, right? I mean, that's where I think at the backbone layer, there's much more vibrant competition. I'm not an expert on this, but as I understand it, whereas last mile, I don't know about you, but my personal experience has been, having lived in a number of places, that like you really have one choice. There's some hope there with like 5G and cell phone and things. But yeah, no, and they just say, hey, we're going to block all these ports, and they're going to say it's too much traffic shaping. They're going to have some like story around it, but what they're really doing is like cutting off. It is. Generally, that's a giant point of failure for a whole bunch of stuff on the internet. I'm not an expert on the regulatory stuff, and then what these recent FCC changes are going to mean. I will say, so far, if you actually look at who has done the cutting off, it actually has been much more the other, like there's sort of different. There's different layers, right? There's the transport layer, who transports the bits. There's a discovery layer, and there's a monetization layer. Discovery is like Facebook and Google and other things, and there's monetization, which is similar companies. And if you actually look, like, what are the debates happening now? It's mostly around people at the discovery monetization layer, like deplatforming, kicking people off Twitter, kicking people off, demonetizing, taking away people's monetization on YouTube. That's where a lot of the controversies are, and those are the companies that are being most aggressive with that right now. And as far as at least I know, there haven't been that many. The transport layer has actually been pretty relaxed about this stuff, because for the most part they're doing. They've got a great thing, right? I mean, even if TV goes away, they still charge you whatever it is per month, and they've got a kind of monopoly to it. So far they've behaved pretty well. But I agree with you. And that's one of the things you see. There's actually a bunch of startups trying to do. There's a long time dream, which I would love to see work. We'll see if it ever works, which is to figure out a way to do, a mesh networking, and people are trying to use crypto kind of principles to see if they can get that to work. So, I route through your phone that routes through this phone, and like I pass you a small amount of crypto, and you pass that person, and like that's always been like one of the long time, dreams. And maybe now that we have incentives in the right way, it could work. But no, I agree with you. That's definitely a critical choke point. I mean, look, I was excited when Google was doing Google Fiber, and it looked like there were going to be more layers. I think they've kind of pulled back on that. By the way, it's a risk to the big tech. I mean, that whole thing. Like, you typically, the most vicious battles in the history of technology are always between kind of different layers in the stack, and as opposed, so what are known as complements, not substitutes, right? So it's not because like they're fighting over this certain amount of money that's sort of passing through them, and it's very well we could see, Netflix is constantly a battle with the ISPs as an example, and we could see more and more of that. So no, it's a great question. I don't have a great answer. I wish there were more vibrant competition at that layer and non-monopolistic kind of companies. But
Thank you, Chris. One last question. What is your favorite NFT that you own?
Look, I own the CryptoKitty 15. What else? I think there's what else is cool in the NFT thing? Well, you guys have. I guess I'll go to Rare Bits and so.
All right. Well, thanks, Chris, for coming to the Commons.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. Yeah.